Welfare and Forestry Miscellaneous Bill 2021. The question proposed is that the bill be now read a second time. Can I call on the Minister for 10 minutes? Minister, and welcome to the House.
Thank you, Laska Hirlock. I'm pleased to be here today to introduce the Animal Health and Welfare and Forestry Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2021 to the Seanad. The bill has gone through the 5 stages in the Dáil and pre-legislative scrutiny before that and is now before the Seanad. The title of the legislation was changed at committee stage to Animal Health and Welfare and Forestry Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2021 from Animal Health and Welfare Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2021 to reflect amendments to the Forestry Act 2014 brought forward by myself and incorporated in the bill at that stage. The purpose of this legislation is to prohibit fur farming in Ireland, provide for a compensation scheme for the farmers affected, and introduce other miscellaneous amendments to the Animal Health and Welfare Act 2013. The legislation also introduces some unrelated but important amendments to the Forestry Act 2014, enabling the Minister to facilitate small-scale planting of native trees without the need to first obtain an afforestation licence. Now to deal with the main provisions of the bill. Section 1 is a short title and commencement section. This section defines the short title of the bill to be the Animal Health and Welfare and Forestry Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2021. The section also contains a commencement provision which will authorise me to choose the date on which the provisions of this legislation will come into operation. Section 2 is the definition sections for the purposes of this Act. It contains one definition only. The Animal Health and Welfare Act 2013 is defined as Act of 2013. Section 3 is an amendment to the definition of an animal product set out in Section 2 of the 2013 Act. The new definition of animal product will include wool, skin, fur or feathers derived from an animal. Section 4 is an amendment of Section 39 of the Act of 2013. Section 39 provides Garvey with the power of arrest without warrant for certain animal health and welfare offences. Section 5 is an amendment of the Section 52 of Act of 2013. Section 52 provides for the penalties that apply to animal health and welfare offences. The offence will be prosecuted on indictment only, indicating the serious nature of the offence, and a person convicted will be liable to a fine not exceeding $250,000 and/or to a term imprisonment not exceeding 5 years. Section 6 is a repeal of Part 12 of the Act of 2013. Part 12 of the Animal Health and Welfare Act 2013 contained provisions in relation to the regulation and licensing of animal marts. This part of the 2013 Act has never been commenced. The Minister's sole policy concern in relation to marts relates to animal health and animal welfare and not the business of an animal mart, as is currently provided for in Part 12. Section 7 inserts a new Part 12A into the 2013 Act, containing 13 separate sections that collectively provide for matters such as the prohibition on fur and skin farming, compensation for existing fur farmers, and related ancillary matters. These new provisions are numbered 71A to 71M. Section 71A provides for a set of definitions to apply to specific terms appearing in this new Part 12A of the Animal Health and Welfare Act. Of particular importance here is the wide definition given to a specified animal, which ensures that the prohibition on fur and skin farming contained in this new part is extensive. It should also be noted, however, that the definition of fur or skin farming is confined to the breeding, rearing or keeping of specified animals solely or primarily for the value of their skin or fur, etc. This prohibition will therefore not apply to animals farmed primarily for other purposes. A further definition to note is the definition of a redundant worker. A redundant worker is defined as an employee who is dismissed during the period commencing 6 months before and ending 6 months after the date of commencement of the Act. This provision applies certain parameters, limits the group of workers that will be eligible when compensation is being calculated. Section 71B contains the prohibition on fur and skin farming and creates a new criminal offence of engaging in fur or skin farming in contravention of the section. Section 71C provides for procedures to be followed for the disposal of specified animals that have been seized by authorised officers on the basis that they are being kept for the value of their fur or skin. The Minister shall, as soon as practicable after seizure and detention, apply to a district court for an order authorising the disposal. Section 71D sets out the overarching principles that will govern the compensation payable to existing fur farming enterprises that will be forced to cease their business activities as a direct consequence of the prohibition of the fur farming provided for in this bill. Compensation will be payable for income losses, non-income losses and costs incurred as a direct result of the prohibition. The amount of compensation for each affected fur farming business is to be determined by an independent assessor to be appointed by the Minister. The bill contains principles and policies that authorise the Minister to make regulations to specify the income and non-income losses and other costs in respect of which compensation will be payable. The basis of valuation for assessing income and non-income losses, and to provide for financial limits to apply to certain compensation payments where appropriate. Regulations will also provide compensation for the costs involved in disposing of breeding mink, demolition and clean-up costs, for payments required to be made to redundant workers, for certain professional fees incurred in the preparation of the applicant's claim form and in the making of representations to my department relating to the development of this legislation. Finally, regulations can also be made to provide for a number of administrative matters, including advanced payments to claimants prior to any final determination of their compensation entitlements under this bill. The appointment of an assessor, the form and content of applications for compensation, information required to be furnished by applicants and any other matters that are incidental, supplemental and consequential thereto. Section 71E provides for the appointment of an assessor to determine the amount of compensation that will be payable to the applicant. The person so appointed must possess an appropriate level of skill, knowledge and qualifications to perform this important function. The assessor shall be independent and shall be paid fees and expenses as determined by the Minister and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. Section 71F establishes the procedure to be followed when an application for compensation is received by the Minister. Section 71G provides the assessor with the power to require further information or documentation from an applicant if the assessor considers that it is reasonably necessary to have the additional information. The assessor may issue a notice in writing requiring applicants to provide further information or documents to verify such information or documents within a defined period for response. Where the information or documents is in the power, possession or procurement of a third party, the applicant shall make every reasonable effort to obtain that information. Section 71H provides direction to an assessor on how to proceed in the event of a failure of the applicant to cooperate. Section 71I provides for the procedure that the assessor will be required to follow when determining a compensation application under this bill. Section 71J provides for an appeal option where either the Minister or an applicant is dissatisfied with the assessor's compensation determination. Appeals against the assessor's determination will be brought in the High Court and applicants will have 3 months to lodge any such appeal. The High Court will have the power to affirm, vary or set aside an assessor's determination. The High Court will also have the power to remit an assessor's determination back to the Minister should it consider it appropriate to do so. However, the High Court, in affirming, varying or setting aside an assessor's determination, may do so only when there is a serious and significant error or a series of such errors in the determination. In conclusion, the legislation will provide an effective right of appeal against an assessor's compensation determination should any party consider it necessary to challenge the same. Section 71K is related to High Court appeal options. Section 71L regards payment of compensation. Section 71M regards the revocation of licences. The Act provides for the revoking of all licences to mink farms for the value of their fur that are current on the day before the commencement of Part 12A of the Bill. Section 8 is an amendment to Schedule 3 to the Act. Section 9 is an amendment of the Forestry Act 2014 and introduces the following definitions that facilitate the promotion of small-scale planting, where small-scale planting of native tree species in a nuanced matter, native tree area as meaning lands under trees with an area not less than 0.1 of a hectare or not greater than 1 hectare, or 2, an area of not less than 0.1 of a hectare that is not greater than 20 metres in width, and B, where the trees concerned are native tree species only, of which not more than 25% are Scots pine. Section 9B, to enable the state to successfully transition to a low-carbon and environmentally sustainable economy. This enables the state to introduce a scheme and incentivise the planting of native tree areas. Section 9C introduces text that permits the Department to facilitate the planting of native trees without an afforestation licence under Section 22 of the Forestry Act 2014. Section 9D, through the planting of native trees, enables the state to successfully transition to a low-carbon and environmentally sustainable economy. This amendment is supported by additional provision to ensure that any scheme complies and protects the environment and complies with environmental law. Section 9E, I'm nearly finished. Section 9E introduces a reference to native tree area grant into Section 27 of the Forestry Act 2014, which deals with the offences and penalties. Where an applicant furnishes information or makes a statement that he or she knows to be false or misleading in a material respect, shall be guilty of an offence under the Forestry Act 2014. Section 9F introduces a schedule that lists the native tree species for which the amendment will apply. Any scheme subsequently created on foot of this amendment will also be confined to the native tree species listed in the schedule. Section 10 is a repeal of certain legislation, and this part provides for the repeal of the Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1979. This act is no longer required and will now not be replaced. So in conclusion, I've presented a detailed view of the provisions of the bill and now welcome comments from the senators. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Garvey, you have 8 minutes.
Another great day for you in your position as Super Junior Minister for Biodiversity and Land Use. I think this is really important. Not only do we get into the programme for government as the Green Party, but now we see it coming to fruition. First of all, I think at this stage everybody knows it's barbaric to have fur and skin farming, and that will no longer be the case in this country. There will be a complete ban on fur and skin farming, thanks to the Minister's work on this and the support from government. Also, for me, I suppose, living down the middle of nowhere with a couple of acres of land, I'm really happy to see about the removal of the need for an afforestation licence to plant up to 2.4 acres or a hectare of native woodland. This is a game changer because lots of people I know who have been on to me about this, and they have land, and they all know about climate change and the importance of trees and carbon sequestration, and they've been saying, why is it so complicated? Can't we plant surely a bit of the land, and it was a good day. I had lots of people to email and ring when I saw this coming through, Minister, because they had been looking for this. And 2.4 acres might not seem a lot to some people, but it's an awful lot to other people, and if every farmer and landowner takes part in this scheme, it'll be a total game changer for our biodiversity, for our native species, for our flooding, for our water quality. It can be a huge, seriously good rural win as well as an environmental win. The design of the initiative to utilise these measures will have to ensure compliance with all environmental law, of course. In advance of the development of a scheme, the Department will undertake a strategic environmental assessment, an appropriate assessment, which is also very very good idea, through scheme criteria. The advisory structures and approval processes in place, the inclusion of an exemption can be undertaken in a legally compliant and sustainable manner. So not only are you doing it, but you're doing it right. It's not being rushed through. It will still be done properly with all things considered, what is the best practice and the best use of the land. It's also good there's a limit of 25% on Scots pine as well, since there's nearly a phobia now of any kind of pine or Sitka spruce or any kind. You're nearly an inch now to even mention them. There's definitely more nuanced debate there to be had around Sitka spruce and forestry and the need for some of the same with regards to rebuilding Ireland and having materials to build houses with. I think it's great that you have focused in on this and you've given it the time it needed. I thank your officials as well for working on this. I see all over, I'm living on the same farm I grew up on, and I see a lot less native wildlife. I see a lot less native birds. I've seen a red squirrel once. All these things we grew up with and took for granted, our children don't see them. They don't experience them, and I think this amendment to this bill could be a game changer. I might introduce a lot of those species again. Also, I see a lot of flooding, and due to badly managed, I suppose, river management projects and stuff where it's only hard engineering, this is a real good win because I see every tree as a column of water, and that's how we need to start seeing trees as well. They also soak up water and they reduce the amount of flooding, and not only that, but their root systems also hold on to soil and stop the soil being washed away, which is another really important element of tree planting. It's not just a lovely green thing to look at on a nice day when you have nothing to be doing. Trees are hugely important in how we move forward as a country and lead the way around native woodlands. Also, it's also a great place for kids to go and play and climb. I was talking to a friend of mine recently and he was saying it would be great if kids could go out and play in forests like we all did as children again, unsupervised, learn to hurt themselves, pick themselves back up and play with sticks and stones and live in the realm of the imagination. And I think this is an important thing. If every farmer and every landowner in Ireland puts in the hectare of native woodland, that will enable children and teenagers and everybody to enjoy native woodlands again. And I think that's something that we all learned during COVID and lockdown. Where are our spaces? Where is our nature? Where are our beautiful native tree lands? No matter what kind of person you are, if you go into a native woodland, you will come out a happier person. So I welcome this day and I really appreciate your work on this and indeed your colleagues in the department.
Thank you, Senator Boyhan. You have 8 minutes.
Thank you, Gael. And firstly, I want to welcome the Minister and your officials here to the House today. And I suppose at the very outset, as you have said yourself, the Programme of Government 2020 included a commitment to end fur farming and to prohibit fur farming, and that's a decision that the government, the tripartite government, agreed to and done, and I personally welcome it. I think it should have been outlawed a long time ago, and I want to acknowledge the Greens' focus in terms of that, amongst a number of other items that haven't gone amiss, but I don't have time to talk about today. So clearly, the experience of Greens being in government before has taught them a few lessons, and that's get out early, out of the traps, and get your message across. And on this particular case, while I might have concerns about other measures and policies you may have, I think it's the right decision. But however, I think what's really important, this is a lawful activity. It is a job. And we're talking about 3 firms, 3 individuals who are operating this business. They are within the law as of today, and they deserve a fair, and I'm calling on you, Minister, to insist upon a fair compensation package. If someone decided tomorrow, government decree said we're going to behead all turkeys and stop turkey farming, you know, could we, on animal welfare grounds, whatever grounds, it'd be crazy, and I wouldn't support it. And I have real concerns about the economy and the business that these people are running, that the government have taken a decision collectively to close down. The argument and the battle is over. We've moved on. But now what we do have control over is a decent and a fair compensation package for the people involved who have invested heavily in a trade. And remember, Minister, you might clarify this, these people are prohibited from selling these mink. Their mink stock cannot be sold. They're valuable. They cannot go outside the state. And there are reasons for that, and I understand them too. But I want you to confirm that in your reply here today. Councillor Norma Moriarty from Waterville and Kerry engaged with me yesterday, as did other people, but she particularly impressed upon me the importance of the engagement of fur farm activities in her local community. And she made the point that the department was talking about an assessment of the business model or income for the last 5 years. But the last 2.5 years have been really bad for most people. And can I suggest that we look at the best 3 years of the last 7, but push that out to 7. We're talking about 3 businesses. And we need to be fair and we need to give them an honest assessment. So there are 3 active farms in the state. And I think she made the point well, that these are employ people, they contribute to the local economy, and they're viable businesses. But most importantly, they're legal businesses which the government have decided they wish to shut down. And might I say, I support that, but I also support a very, very important issue in terms of giving compensation, and not only to them, because we had these groups in before, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture, and I know Senator Daly was there and very active in this, and we made the point also that we wanted adequate compensation for the employees. It's not all about the employers, but the employees who work here must get a fair package. And suggest you get a few weeks standard redundancy and out the door and the best of luck, that's not good enough. Because I'd like to think with some of this compensation that these business people are getting, they will use it to develop new enterprises. Maybe in other animal husbandry or other activities, but let's hope that this will be seed capital for new business. And these are in rural communities of one of, you represent, and you know the heartbeat of rural economy and rural communities. So I think that's really important. So mink farmers need to be compensated. And I think that's really, really important, and I've touched on that. And how you calculate that is all a bit scientific, but the specific details regarding the methodology and the calculation of the compensation payable is important. And you are going to have certain powers, and this bill, is giving you powers. So I think that's really important, what we do here. The bill makes it an offence to engage in fur farming and provides for appropriate penalties, and clearly that is a follow-on from what you're proposing here today. I just want to turn to the issue of the trees. Trees, as you say, play a very important part in the role of climate change, mitigation and diversity, and I fully respect that. But to quote a great green analogy and a green byline that they're always talking about, the right trees in the right places. And I would have some concern about 25% for Scots pines. I don't know the logic behind all of that, but I'm to be convinced, But I really like the idea that the emphasis here has to be focusing on native trees, and I'd say native deciduous trees. I mean, they're small enough plantations, but the collective, the accumulative effect of this is very significant. If this scheme was to be rolled out, the accumulative effect would this be, and to be encouraged and to be welcomed. So I'd have some concerns about that. These measures are not to substitute, as you say, Minister, and I just want you to confirm this. These measures are not a substitute for the ongoing work to reform the licensing process. Or for larger forestation sites, which remain a priority for the Department. And I want again to use this opportunity, Minister. We're not going to open up the forestry licence business here. We have real serious concerns about forestry licences and the infrastructure associated with that. We have got to get timber out of forests. We need it. The economy needs it, the rural communities need it, the building industry needs it, and really it's becoming a bit, I won't say a joke, but it's becoming a great difficulty and a great frustration for many. And I know you're focused on it and things move slowly, but no, come on. And it's another day, and I don't expect you to dwell in that. I have been asked by the Irish Environmental Network to raise some concerns about the strategic environmental assessment, the SE directives and all of that, and the importance that these decisions are made in compliance with law, environmental law, appropriate assessment. You know all the issues around that, and the compliance with environmental law, such as the EIA, the Habitats Directive, the Water Framework Directives. You'll be very familiar with them yourself, I know you will. But I think they're really important, how we consult with people, how we're on the right side of all of that. We have obligations in terms of our house and consultation. So your scheme that you're working on and the criteria has to be legally compliant. In a sustainable manner. And I know you're conscious of that, Minister, but I just want to bring these issues up and I want to flag them with you because clearly they are issues of consent. They are important issues and there will be issues that will exercise some people outside of here, and I want to flag them because I may be bringing some amendments in relation to these areas in the next stages of this bill. So again, I just want to flag with you today strategic environmental assessment and appropriate assessment, legal requirements of EIA, appropriate assessment and the Water Frameworks Directive. And really I think it's important your scheme addresses those issues and hopefully we can have meaningful engagement. But in principle I think they're both really good ideas. I welcome the end of mink farming. I beg you to have a fair deal for these three businesses that have been shut down, and hopefully the compensation that they will get will compensate their workers but also give them seed capital to bring new businesses into their communities. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Daly, you have 8 minutes.
I also welcome the Minister to the House here this evening to discuss the Animal Health and Welfare and Forestry Miscellaneous Provision Bill 2021. And indeed, as has so eloquently been put forward here this evening by Senator Boyhan, I also had communication from Councillor Moriarty, and I welcome her endeavours to contact us all here this evening on behalf of her constituents, one of whom is one of the tree farmers who are ultimately affected by this legislation. Look, I think there's, across all political parties and indeed those who are members of none, that the day has come for the prohibition of fur farming, and I don't think that is an argument anymore and has been accepted by the three farms involved. But as Senator Boyhan has said, we need to get the compensation package right. And Minister, I note from the bill that the specific detail of the compensation will be provided for in regulations made by the Minister. It won't be in the primary legislation. So I suppose in that regard, the book will eventually and finally stop with yourself. So I hope you can take on board our requests here this evening. And while unfortunately I was unavailable on the evening of the Agriculture Committee meeting in question, I would ask you or your officials to have a look back at the proceedings of that Agriculture Committee meeting if and when you are making your final decision. I welcome also the fact that you are employing an independent assessor, and I know while you need to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and for legislation to stand up, you need also to include, I suppose, the safety net for both sides of the right to appeal. But I do feel a little bit alarmed by even having to discuss the fact that there is or may be a need to appeal to the High Court when we are only talking about 3 farmers. I say normally in circumstances like this, you would be negotiating, or your officials or whoever, with a stakeholders forum or a representative body. When there are only 3 involved, I can't see how you can't have all 3 people who are directly involved around the table when the final package is negotiated. I've had correspondence not only from Councillor Moriarty but from all 3, and they have a number of requests which have been outlined, but I think it's important enough that we repeat them again. One would be, and as a farmer yourself you know, it's not just in this commodity but in all commodities there are price cycles, and I think the last 2.5 years during the COVID crisis has been hard for a lot of sectors and many sectors, and I think, as has been said, it would be totally inappropriate that the income of those farmers for those particular years would be used as a baseline for whatever final figure of compensation is agreed. We need to go back beyond COVID, and I agree with the proposal of Senator Boyhan that you would look at 7 years' income for those farmers. It would give a more realistic picture of their turnover, their income and profit, which wasn't actually evident in some of the years that may be getting assessed. I think that's vitally important. That COVID aside, I think they deserve to get the opportunity that a full cycle of prices would be looked at, which would include the 7 years. I've also had requests from some of those involved that they would have the opportunity to view the report that was commissioned by the Department and completed by Grant Thornton. They seem to think that they haven't had the opportunity to see that report. And finally, you did say in your own few words that a lot of information has been sought from the people involved, and maybe even further information will be required for the independent assessor. I hope that the people will be compensated for the provision of this information. A lot of it will involve maybe them employing their accountants, maybe even their legal representatives. We all know none of that comes cheaply. So I hope there will be some part of the compensation built in to include the expenses and the costs that they will incur in providing the information that may be requested from them by the Department. On the forestry side of things, Minister, again I welcome the change in the Act and the inclusion of where somebody can plant up to a hectare without having to go through the rigours of a deforestation licence or whatever. On that, I know the devil will be in the detail. This is just a foundation so that you and your colleagues in the department can then maybe incorporate riparian or agroforestry in future schemes. So I suppose we'll have to wait and see what those schemes are before we know more of the detail of how this thing will go forward. The one plea I would make with you this evening, Minister, is that irrespective of how the schemes are designed, whatever trees are planted without an afforestation licence under this amendment to the legislation will be incorporated in our national inventory when it comes to the calculation of our net carbon emissions. They will have to be included in accounting for our sequestration totals. Like we have the ludicrous situation at the moment where hedgerow is not included. So while I welcome the possibility of farmers all over the country to plant up to a hectare, if like hedgerows, those trees are then not included in our national inventory, it would be ridiculous and I think would defeat the whole purpose of selling this scheme and similar schemes along this line for the purposes of combating climate change. I think that's vitally important, and I know there is progress being made on the possibility of hedgerows being included, but seeing as we're in our infancy of this particular move, I think it would have to be put in stone from the word go that it would be included. Other than that, as I say, I welcome it warmly. And as I say, on the fur farming side of things, I would plead with you, because as I said, the book will stop with you eventually. There are only 3 people involved. They're all in rural areas. They've been providing employment. And for them to move on to the next stage of whatever their life may hold, considering that their enterprise is now being taken away from them, they will need seed capital to start something else. And I hope we don't shortchange them. Garma, good Minister.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ahearn, you have 8 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. And can I welcome the Minister to the Chamber, or home, in another way of putting it, I suppose. And can I thank her for the work and the very effective and strong work she's been doing in her portfolio in almost the last 2 years now, and to continue on that, because it's very important and hugely significant. And look, like other speakers have said, this is a bill that's coming forward, which is necessary, and I think everyone accepts that. It's a commitment that has been made by the previous government, and in fairness to the 3 businesses, they recognise that themselves, and they've wanted to work with government and with the department and with the minister in relation to how to do that. How to do that best, and I suppose that's the real issue, and that's why essentially why we're speaking here today is to speak on their behalf, because it's very difficult for them. Like, this is one of the first times ever government have decided to close a business and close a sector on people and close businesses, and how we do that and how we support them and how we compensate them is really important. And even simple things like I think it was back in the summer, there was numerous calls by those businesses to try and get the opportunity to come in to the committee, the Agricultural Committee, to air their views during the pre-legislative scrutiny part, and they really had to fight to get in and get the opportunity to speak, and I think it was really important for them to do that. But then on the back of that, it's frustrating on their part, because they haven't seen any development, or they certainly, I suppose, they probably feel like they've been left out of the loop in some way. And like my colleagues who've spoken already, they have certain asks and things that they feel that need to be addressed. So there's about 5 asks that they've asked me to put forward, and they put forward these at the Agricultural Committee during the pre-legislative scrutiny stage, and it was in relation to staff redundancy and reskilling, and in particular in rural areas. You know, these 3 businesses are in Donegal, in Laois, and in Waterville and Kerry. They're looking for agreement compensation for farmers, agreement of demolition costs of farms, which is crucially important, environmental impact assessment of the area of the farm prior to demolition, and the opportunity to view and to discuss the report done by the department auditors, Grant Thornton. And certainly their view is they haven't had the opportunity to do any of those. They haven't had the engagement. It's welcomed that there's going to be a compensation package, which is important, but people need to know at some stage, what it is. And the main 2 questions they have, it's very simple, is when are they going to close, and what is the compensation going to be? And the talk of it being based on the previous 5 years seems very unfair, because it was loss-making for those 5. If it can be stretched out to 7 over 3, or even stretched out to 10 years, it would be much fairer on those businesses. That has been done in other jurisdictions, so it wouldn't be unique. But essentially, their real ask is just to get information and to find out. Like, these people are totally understanding of where they are, that their business has to close. But some of them want to go on to a different life or a different career, or start up another business. That's not possible until they actually know what type of compensation they're going to get, how much they're going to get in terms of demolishing their land. That can be very tricky and very, very costly. And they need to know those things, and know those things as soon as possible. And as other people said here, it's not just about the employers, it's the employees as well. And we need to be able to have the opportunity to upskill those and give them opportunities somewhere else. Because at the end of the day, this is business in rural Ireland. You know, we're trying to encourage people to come out of city centres, to have a life, have a job, have a career, have a quality of life. Donegal, Laois, Kerry, my own county in Tipperary, try to offer that. And you know, we need to make sure that we have that available for them. So look, I'd stress the significance of just, you know, being open with them and letting them know as quickly as possible when decisions are going to be made and what they're going to get when their livelihood is closed. In relation to forestry, look, I welcome what you've announced today, and it's really important. And I think it's significant to say that in terms of forestry, things are improving and improving month on month. And that's extremely important for a county that I'm from. You know, we have numerous sawmills around Tipperary, like Dunn Sawmill in Trangan and Sheehan, in Ballyporeen and Dundrum. And they employ an awful lot of people, good business, good jobs, again in rural Ireland. And it's hugely important that those businesses are viable and the department get through the licences as quickly as possible. It has ramped up, it has speeded up under your watch, Minister. I think that does need to be acknowledged on the floor of this House, that it has improved. But obviously when things improve, you want them to improve even more and even quicker, and that's the demand on people, and it's an understandable demand. But look, I just want to wish you well on this and wish you well on the work that you're doing. And thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ahearn. Senator Boylan, you have 8 minutes.
I'd like to echo what others have said, and that I welcome the aspects of this bill that do relate to the ban for farming. It's a barbaric practice, and it is about time that we as legislators have caught up with where the public have been for a long time. Sinn Féin as a party has been opposed to the farming of mink since the 2007 Ardèche, and I'm happy to see that we are now with this legislation going with the tide against fur farming, which is already banned in other countries like Austria, Croatia, the Netherlands, Britain and the Czech Republic, and I believe it will become illegal in Norway from 2025. Others have already pointed out that there are just 3 active farms in the state that breed and rear mink for the purposes of pelting for the fur industry, and each December approximately 80% of those mink are killed, while the 20% that are left are kept as breeding stock. And I think it is important for people to realise that mink are not native to Ireland. They're native to Canada and the United States of America, and were introduced as a fur farming animal in many parts of Europe in the 20s and 30s. And unfortunately, somebody, I suppose, with the background that I have and my work within the National Park in Killarney has seen the devastation that mink escapes have caused to our biodiversity. And it is, I suppose, welcome now that at least our ground nesting birds, our waterfowl and our fish will no longer have the threat of any more large-scale releases of mink. But we do also need to focus on eradicating the mink that are out there in the wild, because they are an invasive species and they do untold damage to our native species. Also, as others have mentioned, there is issues around, particularly some have pointed out, issues around those who own the fur farms. I'd like to focus a little bit more just on, I suppose, the workers, because, as others have said, the nature of the industry, it's a legal industry up until now, and we're going to be making it illegal. So I do think that while we see that the industry owners are to be compensated, I think the workers also deserve to know what package is put in place for them. And I do think it's entirely unfair that they're only going to be eligible for statutory redundancy. And I hope that the Minister will be able to outline how that matter can be addressed going forward, and also about a retraining scheme. Because so if the Minister can tell us, I suppose, what progress has been made in the issue of statutory redundancy, and do you foresee anything above that being provided to those workers, and where are we on the request, I suppose, for a retraining fund for staff to be put in place? Given the change the workers will experience in their work life as a result of this legislation, it's only right that the government now steps in to provide training for those workers so that they're not out of a job. I'd also like to, I suppose, selfishly talk about the broadening of the scope of this piece of legislation. And I welcome that move to broaden it out to miscellaneous provisions, because I think there's plenty of other animal welfare issues that need to be addressed through legislation. And I thought it'd be Minister McConalogue who is here, but it's yourself, and maybe you can relay this back to him, because he's very familiar with the issues that I'm concerned with. And I've engaged with him on a number of times, both at the pre-legislative scrutiny process and from the ongoing post-enactment scrutiny of the Animal Health and Welfare Act on the Agricultural Committee. And one of the biggest areas of concern has to do with tackling the illegal puppy trade and the smuggling of dogs. And despite the provisions of the 2013 Act, illegal trade and wanton abuse of puppies is still regularly reported in the media. And I will be proposing amendments to this legislation that would address some of the legal loopholes in the legislation that were not foreseen when it was drafted, and nobody will disagree in saying that the Animal Health and Welfare Act has seen great improvements around animal welfare, but we still have a very, very long way to go in addressing the issues, particularly around those within dogs. So the amendments I want to put forward will tighten up concerns around the proof of ownership of dogs and give primacy to the microchip. So when you get your licence, it's mandatory that you include the microchip number on that licence. I'd also like the Animal Health and Welfare Act to align with the Control of Dogs Act, which is when an animal is seized because of welfare reasons, whether that's illegal smuggling or just general welfare. In the Control of Dogs Act, you're allowed to rehome that animal after 5 days, whereas under the Animal Health and Welfare Act, that's not possible. And I think that that's just an oversight when the legislation was drafted, but we need to align those two acts, because authorised officers such as the DSPCA need to go through lengthy and expensive court processes in order to rehome those animals. And the animals that are seized, generally when they're very, very young pups, are kept for anything up to 18 months before they can be legally rehomed. And this serves to strengthen the illegal puppy farmers, because they know this and they use this facility to weaken the charities and try and defund them through lengthy processes. So I look forward to debating those amendments with the Minister and I hope that he will keep an open mind on considering them. Now that you have broadened the scope of this legislation, I think it would be really useful to take on board those amendments. Just in relation to forestry, I think it is a welcome step to sort the uncontroversial projects from the large-scale conifer plantations. And I think we're all familiar with the failures that we have had to date in handling the crisis in the forestry system. But as we all know, unfortunately, time is not on our side, and we do need to get the issues within forestry resolved as a matter of urgency if we're to have any hope of meeting the climate targets. And so a lot needs to be done to turn the ship around. As I said, it is welcome that there is improvements being made, but we have to resolve the issues within the system itself, and we need to establish a system that's fit for purpose, that's well resourced, and that screens out the bad planning applications at the start, as opposed to trying to prevent people from objecting to those bad planning applications. We need to be screening them out. We need a system that's compliant, as others have said, with the Aarhus Convention, and that doesn't block people from making the objections. And so yeah, I suppose, look, I'll leave it at that, but I do look forward to engaging in the committee and report stage debate, and I would ask, Minister, that you take back my comments just around the illegal animal welfare. It's a very well crafted amendments that I've been working on for the last year and a half with the OPLA, and I would really like if you would give consideration that they would be facilitated in this Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hoey, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. As always, Minister, it's a pleasure to welcome you back into your own house today, particularly on a topic that I know has been of huge importance to the Green Party, and this kind of legislation really shows, I think, the benefit of having a Green Party in government. My own views on animal rights are not a secret. Like many in this House, I abhor animal cruelty, and I think we have a long way to go towards living in harmony with our furry, scaly and winged friends, but today we're here to talk about our furry friends. I'm glad to speak on behalf of the Labour Party in support of the key principles and purpose of this bill, that is to introduce a statutory prohibition on fur farming. Speaking for the Labour Party and as a long-standing advocate for animal rights, I'm very glad to see this legislation come before us, and I think there's a growing acceptance for the need of such prohibition, and the legislation is receiving a broad welcome, which is very good to see. It would be remiss of me not to say that I'm sad that it has taken us this long to get to this stage of collective agreement on banning of the abhorrent and disgusting practice of fur farming, but I suppose we should be glad that we eventually got here, and that hopefully no more innocent animals will have to suffer for the sheer vanity of wanting to wear a fur pelt in Ireland. I will take this moment to note the alternatives for fur for those who want them. There are bio-based faux furs made from oil from vegetable crops rather than traditional petroleum oils, and of course there's the option of using what we have and recycled faux fur, and I'm a particular dab hand at sourcing fancy faux fur coats, so I'll happily help anyone who's on the hunt online for one. And we all need to move towards making better use of what we already have and have already produced in order to reduce pollution and avoid adding to our already overstuffed landfills. To be quite frank, I think we could maybe have a conversation about going one step further than what is put in this bill. And I know that we can't do it today, but I would like for you, Minister, to maybe consider this and take this back with you. I think we should consider our stance on the importing of fur into Ireland. Our opposition to this practice should not end with simply banning it here. We should not be funding this cruel industry globally. Fur shouldn't be contributing to the already massive carbon footprint of fast fashion. And to be perfectly honest, I would be happy to see us reach a point in Ireland where wearing of fur is considered socially unacceptable, and I'm aware that this might be seen as an extremely radical position, but it's one that I stand by. I've often gotten up in this House and spoken about a just transition for workers, and I welcome the fact that there's provision for a compensation scheme, the legislation before us today. There's no doubt that jobs will be lost because of this, and it is only right and proper that the workers are compensated. Part of the compensation assessment is regarding the proper dismantling of buildings, and I know that there were particular issues raised during the pre-legislative scrutiny regarding the removal and disposals of asbestos at some of the sites. Given the environmental focus of our time, which is only right and proper, it will be important, Minister, that adequate funding is provided in the scheme for the correct dismantling of buildings with the least amount of damage to the surrounding environs, and that buildings are not simply left to rot, particularly if there's a concern around asbestos. So the safe and proper dismantling of buildings really has to be very thoroughly included in the cost of compensation. Minister, I just want to raise a question around 71C Part 3, which is regarding the disposing of animals. And I just want to seek clarification what this means for the animals themselves, because I note that the application has to be made to the district court, and I assume here that what is meant is that for the mink is to be put down. Does this 71C Part 3 mean it's automatic disposal, or if alternative methods can be found, can they be utilised? Because I think it's really vital that these poor animals are treated as humanely as possible, and I just want to know, is it an automatic that they're going to be put down? And I am at no point suggesting that they be let off into the wild or anything like that, but they have to be treated humanely as possible. So just if you could get clarity on that. And while we're on the topic of animal welfare, which is arguably why we have this bill before us, as we agree that farming animals for their fur is an egregious abuse of their welfare, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the wider issue of animal welfare in this country. And I think we can all agree that we're a country of animal lovers, but we're also a country that, at times, has had a poor track record and accountability for animal cruelty. And I have to say there are no circumstances, personal or commercial, where it should be permissible to excuse or overlook animal cruelty. And I will say we have relatively decent pro-animal legislation here, but there is pretty woeful enforcement of it at times. Every so often an image appears online of some really awful, terrible animal cruelty, such as a mare with their hooves overgrown, a horse on the side of the road, and people pile on and we all exclaim how awful it is and like, oh my God, whatever can we do about it? But it's extremely rare that perpetrators are held to account. And I know there's a variety of reasons for that, including tracing, but we do not hold the perpetrators of animal cruelty to account the way that we should and could do. And I will say I'm coming into this House quite regularly to discuss giving more money to commercial industries that profit off the backs, literally, of animals. To note that all welfare charities have to share approximately 3 million, with the rest of the work done on goodwill, volunteers and fundraising. My family fundraises regularly for the Drogheda Animal Rescue, a small organisation in desperate need of funding to help animals in its care. And sometimes when I hear the eye-watering figures mentioned in relation to the industries that profit off animals, I find myself reeling, thinking of my mother trundling down West Street in Drogheda, trying to get every penny that she can so that the animals in their care can be fed. So a lot of money has been invested into the profiting of animals industry, and I know today we're discussing the right and proper compensation for those working in the fur farming and skinning industry and for the workers who are losing their livelihoods. But I posit that alongside today's conversation, perhaps we need to consider how much money we're investing into animal welfare. If we compare the billions to the couple of million for animal welfare for some of the charities, it is an enormous gap. Animal welfare charities often do this work off their own bat on the goodwill of volunteers and not a huge amount of state support. So I'm aware that I've gone somewhat off track, but I just wanted to focus on the animal welfare issue for a moment. There needs to be tougher sentencing for those found guilty of animal cruelty. There should be higher fines and jail sentences, and in the most serious cases, life bans on keeping animals to stop those found guilty of animal abuse reoffending. And there needs to be better funding for the charities who pick up the literal broken pieces of animals that people have abandoned. So I hope alongside this ministry you might take that back underneath your green banner and consider those issues, as I think they're vitally important to animal welfare. Anyways, I'm very glad to speak in support of this bill and to reiterate my support and that of the Labour Party for this important measure, which will see us finally move to a prohibition of fur farming in the interests of animal health, welfare and rights.
Senator Black, you have 8 minutes.
God bless you, Herlock, and Minister, you're very welcome to the House today. I rise this evening in absolute broad support of the Government's proposed legislation, and I welcome the provisions it makes regarding the welfare of certain farmed animals in Ireland and relatedly Irish biodiversity. However, I do have significant concerns about the sections of the bill that relate to forestry licences. As my colleagues have, all of my colleagues here have already acknowledged, the practice of farming animals, specifically for the production of pelt, is outdated. And in saying this, we're not condemning in any way the 3 farms in Ireland that are presently breeding mink for its fur, which is provided for in the current law. Instead, we're saying that we no longer feel that it's appropriate or necessary to breed animals specifically for the purpose of fur production. And we're asking these 3 fur farms to come with us on the journey as we build a society that treats animals and the natural environment with greater care. I'm really glad that the Government is prioritising this legislation, taking learnings from our EU counterparts that have successfully outlawed fur farming without it having a negative economic impact for the affected farms. Fur farming is not a traditional Irish industry with heritage that needs to be preserved, but we do need to ensure that the businesses and their workers are currently operating legitimately are compensated for the loss they will incur on account of this new legislation. And I very warmly welcome the provisions that the bill makes in this way. I'd like some clarification, Minister, regarding the proposed timeline of the legislation and what lead-in time intended to be provided to the 3 fur farms, so as that they can begin to phase out their operations over a gradual period. And additionally, I'm curious whether there have been any efforts made to support the affected fur farms to diversify their businesses such that they could make a positive contribution to the environment and Irish wildlife. And while this bill will indeed have a positive impact for animal welfare and biodiversity here in Ireland, we do need to have a broader conversation about the international fur trade. This legislation will not have the broader intended effect if we continue to play a role in the trade of farmed fur products internationally. There are consultations happening in the UK at the moment regarding the trade of fur, and I think we should consider advancing conversations of this nature at the European level. On the issue of animal welfare, and obviously I can't speak on today's legislation without also mentioning the concerns I have relating to the health and welfare of other animals in Ireland, namely those in the greyhound racing and hare coursing industry. Figures were published yesterday in the Irish Examiner highlighting the number of greyhound deaths at Irish racetracks that rose to their highest ever level in 2021. with 154 deaths being recorded by Greyhound Racing Ireland, in addition to 197 injuries. But the true figures are likely much higher, and how can we in this day and age continue to provide such vehement support to industries that are treating animals in this way for the purposes of entertainment? And I'm using that word in inverted commas, is beyond me. Minister, with regard to the forestry provisions contained within this bill, both myself and the Civil Engagement Group colleagues have a number of concerns. And from my reading of it, the provisions to change the Forestry Act 2014 were introduced by ministerial amendment at select committee stage, and there was no mention of such provisions when this bill was introduced initially in the Dáil. And while we acknowledge the important role of forestry in combating both the climate and biodiversity crisis, we, the Civil Engagement Group, are concerned about how these changes are being introduced. And I'm concerned that in passing this legislation, we will award the Minister a blank cheque of powers with which they could seek to decide on exemptions and a regime to allow for unregulated planting. The Climate Change Advisory Council emphasised in their technical report on the carbon budgets the importance of the right tree in the right place, and that impacts of climate measures on biodiversity are context dependent and require, and I quote, assessment on a case-by-case basis to determine how to implement the right action in the right place. And this criteria must apply to our actions in forestry. And my question for you, Minister, is this: why are size-based thresholds being applied in this legislation when Ireland has already been found at issue for applying size-based thresholds to screen out requirements for environmental impact assessment in case C66/06 before the Court of Justice of the European Union in 2008. The area defined in this bill as a native tree area can be up to 1 hectare, which for perspective is more than the area covered by 38 tennis courts. This is a huge amount of land to exempt from Section 22 of the 2014 Act. So I'd ask you, Minister, what provisions are there for public participation and access to justice on these matters? It's vitally important that in any changes we make to the current regime, our obligations under the Aarhus Convention are upheld, but I'm concerned that in passing this legislation we will instead contravene them. So I would indicate that my colleague Senator Alice Mary Higgins is hugely concerned about these provisions, and we may seek to introduce amendments at committee stage to address these concerns. And I thank the Minister for taking the time to be with us in the Chamber this evening, and I look forward to your response.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Murphy, you have 5 minutes.
Well, Margaret, and I suppose like many other people here, I welcome the Minister, number one, and I welcome this particular legislation. And of course, as we now know, that the purpose of the bill is the statutory prohibition on fur farming, and in particular the impact it will have on the 3 active farms in the state. I think it's important to point out they were acting lawfully, but you know, now what we're doing here is to compensate them. And the legislation is to compensate them for, you know, I suppose they're going to lose their businesses, and certain people are going to lose their jobs. And the provision of the bill that govern the nature of the compensation scheme that can be provided for to ensure that mink farming operators are to be compensated for their losses and costs directly resulting from the prohibition on fur farming in Ireland. And the bill sets out the criteria upon which compensation for income loss, non-income loss, and certain costs will be payable, and the type of costs that will be covered by the compensation scheme made under the legislation will include redundancy payments to the employees, which is important, certain professional fees, again important, mink disposal and clean-up costs, and the costs involved in the demolition of mink buildings. And I said there's only 3 mink farms in the country, and it's only right that they will be compensated because we no longer will be dealing with mink farms. Just in relation to forestry, again, I welcome what's happening here. As you know, I've been a big advocate of urging people to plant and making it as easy as we can for them. And I acknowledge, like many other people, we have issues here with forestry, and hopefully we'll get through that, and we will be able to encourage more planting of native species. I'm sure, Minister, you do also realise that in relation to some of the pines that are growing at the moment, there is a market for them. And the other thing, there is land, and it's the only thing that will grow on that land. So while we don't want those all over the place, I think there is a market there. They are, important to sawmills. They are important for exporting. And while we do have to encourage more native trees, and that's what I want, I think we need to keep that in mind. But can I bring up a hobby horse of mine in this relation? And I'm wondering, could you bring it in under the legislation, is covering the planting of fruit trees. And if you go back to generations in this country, nearly every homestead had an orchard. And there was 10, 12, 15, 20 trees. Now imagine re-encouraging that and what it would do for carbon count. But on top of that, I was presented with figures lately, which I'm getting checked out. Somebody that's in the business told me that we're actually spending almost 80 million on importing apples into this country, where we have one of the greatest climates for growing apples in the world. And a lot of that comes in from France, and I know we have shortages when our own run out and we have to import. But just imagine the double benefit of, covering small tree plantations and, allowing it as a carbon count. And I really think that's something that should be encouraged. Because if we go back to a lot of the small and medium farm outlets in the past, there was that orchard. And I robbed some of the orchards myself, to be honest. I put my hand up, law of Zeus. But, it really should be followed up. I think it's a huge, and I think farmers would engage in that. Because it's another method of getting the carbon count right. And I think, as I said, it would be doubly productive on the basis, you could have all these apples produced, sold in local markets. And I really think it's worth doing a little bit of research on. And I would be really delighted if we could look that up, see can we include it somewhere in the legislation and move forward with it. Thank you very much indeed.
So next I will call on Aisling Dolan. Senator Aisling Dolan, please. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I probably won't need all of them. Thank you very much, Chair. I suppose just to welcome Minister Pippa Hackett here today, and I suppose on the Animal Health, Welfare and Forestry Bill. And again, it is welcome to see this legislation, I suppose, to prohibit fur farming, I suppose, in Ireland. But I know we are looking at promoting in our society, I suppose, more sustainable, fashion when it comes to fashion, but also that animal welfare, that we are leaders in Ireland on animal welfare. I think that it is crucial as well that there is the benefits and that there is a package there for farmers that are impacted or by those that are engaged in fur farming in terms of loss of income. I'm particularly interested in the small-scale planting of native tree areas, Minister, that's also a part of this bill. So in other words, that we can increase the native tree planting area by removing the requirement for an afforestation licence for an area of not less than 0.1 hectare and not greater than 1 hectare. I think this is really important, that it's going to be important to encouraging farmers to be able to take benefit, not to have to do the administrative part of actually having to apply for another licence. However, Minister, I would like, I suppose, to know a little bit more about the, I suppose, update, if you're able to give any, just in terms of forestry licences and so on, and even, I suppose, the number of ecologists that have been taken into the Department of Agriculture to deal with, I suppose, the challenges that we've seen with forestry over the last year to 2 years. Minister, I look forward to seeing lots more coming through your area, and particularly I know under the organics as well. I'm not here to talk about that today, but do look forward to sort of an update in that area, and I'm sure we'll be engaging again, and hopefully that should be coming to visit the areas of Roscommon and East Galway in the future too. So, Gamil Monkut. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Seán Kyne, the whole Cuig no mate.
Gramargath, Gael, and I'd like to welcome Minister Hackett to the Chamber and welcome the publication of this bill. I know miscellaneous provisions allows for a number of things to be included under the same title, and I think slightly a pity, because I think that the central provision of the bill, which is the ban on fur farming, is worthy enough of its own bill with its own title included. But look, those are decisions that are made, and I understand that as well. I served in the Department of Gael, which is across the road from Agricultural House, so there was numerous protests. Maybe you were part of them yourself in your day, I don't know. But there was certainly noisy protests for a long number of years, and they achieved a result in terms of this ban, which was announced at Cabinet in June 2019, of which I was a member of that Cabinet, and that came about by pressure, that came about by campaigning to ban it. So I welcome the move. It has taken some time from that decision at Cabinet to publication of the bill. I know it was part of the programme for government as well. And, look, as time progresses, there are certain things that are ethically and morally, difficult to defend, and I think that's evident in this case. And I'm sure who's ever here in 10, 20 years' time, there may be other things that they'll be talking about that are now taking place that will equally be deemed to be difficult to defend. Really, that for another day. So I do welcome this interim provision. I welcome in relation to the ethical treatment of the animals as they come to an end, and the proper treatment of the owners and the workers who have and are operating a legal business, and we are through legislation closing them down for the reasons as stated. So I certainly welcome the provisions of the bill in that regard. The other element regarding the whole issue of native trees, and I particularly like the schedule that you have with all the beautiful native trees that we have, particularly the hazel ash, holly, crabapple, Scots pine, sessile and pendulate, oak and the rowan, which are familiar with all of those, and they add so much beauty and diversity to the Irish countryside where they are. I think I mentioned during the Forestry Bill in 2014 the poor holly tree at Christmas, and we're not talking about a few branches or a few sprigs of holly, but unfortunately in certain cases whole holly trees have been cut down at the base and taken away, and that's a pity. You see a lot of situations where there are all male holly trees and none with the berries in certain areas, and I hope that initiatives can be done to enhance the holly trees as well. I suppose one area, and it comes up every year and it will come out again in the next number of weeks, regarding the forage areas under the basic payment scheme and the disadvantaged area scheme each year. And last year's, as it would have been historically as well, states the terms and conditions states that eligible area excludes woods, scrub, ponds and marshy and wet areas. Now I understand that because there's very little grazing in those areas. In some cases they may be inaccessible, so therefore they're not deemed to be eligible. But they do, and they are so important in relation to the biodiversity that quite rightly farmers are expected to promote. So I know lands planted post-2009 aren't eligible, but plantations post-2009 presumably are. I'm not sure if that includes conifers or just deciduous. I'm not entirely sure, and I'm not sure in terms of the areas. But I think, if there are native schemes that this legislation will allow for, it's important that they would be included in terms of forage areas, because one of the difficulties that we have in convincing farmers, not all but some, and I attended the event or the IFA session in Athenry Mart a number of weeks ago, and there are some farmers there who do not want to plant trees, and they feel that it's taking land out of production. They feel that that it's setting them back, and so we have to try and encourage farmers. And I think it's important that if there are small areas or even up to a hectare planted, that they will be eligible in terms of forage areas as well. And I think it's worth looking as well in relation to scrub and that, because farmers get under the satellite scheme, they get letters out telling them that certain areas are not eligible, and some of them, their first inclination is, well, we should remove it, and obviously we don't want that. So I think it's worth looking at small areas like that, whether it's counterproductive actually penalising them in relation to small areas of forage acres. So thank you, Minister, and best of wishes in this bill getting through the Houses.
And now we'll have Senator Fiona O'Loughlin, please.
Thanks very much.
Senator.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate that. And Minister, you're welcome to the chair of your own house. And thought it was interesting when I noticed the title of the bill in terms of two very distinct different areas coming in together, but two important areas as well. And certainly I would welcome and support the introduction of this legislation, which obviously delivers a key commitment made in the programme for government, and taking the first aspect in relation to mink farming, placing a statutory prohibition on this. And I think that's very welcome, because the practice certainly has been considered outdated and inhumane for some time. So it was really important that certainty was brought in relation to this. And of course, acknowledging the 3 different mink farms that we have in the country, who were basically breeding and rearing mink for the purposes of taking these furs. And obviously they were operating a lawful, if not popular, business. So it is important that provision is put in place to offer compensation to those 3 farm businesses. But another area obviously of key interest, and key interest I know to your particular area and brief, Minister, is in relation to, of course, the forestry section. And I think it's really welcome what you're proposing to do here. We're all very conscious of the problems that have been in the forestry area over the last number of years. So in relation to removing a legislative barrier to small-scale native tree planting, and our native trees are hugely important in all of our counties, and my own county is named after the oak tree, which is a particularly lovely tree, and I'm really glad to see that we are encouraging farmers. And as Senator Kyne said, not every farmer will want to go down this road, but it's important that those that do, that we give them the opportunities to do that. My own family, we have land in forestry in Kildare, and mainly it is native. But in terms of the fact that farmers then won't have to acquire a licence for an area that is not less than 0.1 hectare and not greater than 1 hectare, I think is important, because it will re-engage farmers in the whole forestry area, and it will certainly play a part in terms of meeting the ambitious roadmap towards climate neutrality as already outlined in the Climate Action Plan. And the target there, I know, is ambitious compared to the last number of years, and I know it's going to be challenging to meet in the next decade, and that's why it's important that measures such as these are put in place to support and to encourage farmers. Obviously, a lot more needs to be done in terms of substantially increasing our forestry rates over the next decade, but I've no doubt that while this is not a substitute for ongoing work, it is a measure that will help and support. So I certainly welcome and support this bill. Garvey.
I'd just like to thank everybody for their input into this important bill. 2 very different titles, Fur and Native Woodland Scheme. I think it's good that we have a minister in the House that has worked on this. She's one of our own, Senator. And when the minister is ready now, we can call on you to give 10 minutes if you want. There's no major panic, Minister, so take your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I'd like to thank all the senators for their constructive feedback and their support for the bill. I suppose it is quite... there are 2 main issues here, and indeed the forestry piece was added at the committee stage in the Dáil for a number of reasons. I suppose the bill was coming from my own department, and it wasn't going to be very easy to go and try and attach it to some other department's bill. That's probably the main reason, but also the importance of getting of enabling us to be able to plant more trees, and I think that's come out strongly from everyone in here, and the importance of that. The programme for government includes a commitment to bring forward legislation that prohibits fur farming in the state, and as Senator Kyne indicated, it has taken quite a while to get here, but it is here now. And as of this moment, as has been highlighted by the senators, that fur farming is still legal, but will soon become illegal. And I suppose we have moved from a position where it was considered socially acceptable to perhaps less so, and really there is now broad consensus, not just among society and citizens of our country, but also among veterinary and other scientific experts, that certain animals should not be farmed for their fur or skin because the serious animal welfare concerns cannot be mitigated. And you know, I think that has really impacted too in terms of the societal concern in relation to this. There are 3 active, as the senators have alluded to, 3 active fur farms in the state that breed and rear mink for the purposes of pelting for the fur industry. And this statutory prohibition on fur farming will obviously impact these 3 fur farms who are, as I said, currently operating a lawful business. So for this reason, the draft legislation does make provision for a scheme of compensation that my department will make available to the 3 farm businesses affected by the prohibition. And I do note that several senators, Daly, Boyhan, Ahearn, indeed, in relation to the farms themselves, the compensation, we have to ensure that it is fair. Compensation package, and indeed Senator Boylan mentioned about the workers themselves as well, as did 1 or 2 other senators, that we have to ensure that the compensation package and the redundancy package that they face is fair too. And I think that we will endeavour to ensure that the appointment of an independent assessor will help us with that, that it's only right. The bill also introduces a number of other miscellaneous amendments to the Animal Health and Welfare Act, I suppose most notably the forestry provisions, which do include provisions to introduce a limited exemption from which a licence to carry out small-scale planting will be allowed. This, I suppose it's important to say that this is enabling legislation. It's not a scheme as yet, and we will certainly engage widely with stakeholders in the design of that scheme to ensure that it's fit for purpose and certainly doesn't, it certainly mustn't impact negatively on the environment, on water courses, on land, on special habitats, and we will work really hard to ensure that the development of such a scheme will be undertaken following the completion of a strategic environmental assessment and appropriate assessment, which will include stakeholder and public consultation. And I hope that maybe eases some of the concerns. Certainly Senator Black and her CEG have raised that also. I think beyond, the need to plant trees, there was a few queries in relation to the size, and at the moment you can plant up to 0.1 of a hectare, which is probably about the size of 30 metres by 30 metres without a licence. That is not accounted for in our carbon inventory. Anything over 0.1 of a hectare is included in our carbon inventory. So by raising it above 0.1, we will include that area as long as it's more than 20 metres deep. So it's not particularly straightforward, but if we were to plant a riparian margin, for example, around a river that was less than 20 metres, and it could go on, if it was suitably positioned, obviously right tree, right place and all of that, that at the moment wouldn't be accounted for. But indeed, the work that certainly I think Senator Daly, you alluded to the work that Teagasc are working on in terms of inventory of hedgerows and trees that are outside of a forest, and that work is ongoing, and I did check earlier on today, and potentially another year's worth of work, and what they will then do is propose their findings to the EPA, who will then make the decision whether to include it or not. So I think that will be progress within the next couple of years, that we will hopefully get to a stage where we can include every hedgerow and potentially every type of planting, every tree planting. Unfortunately, at the moment, from my understanding, if we were to include hedges at this moment, we would be in sort of negative territory, because we have lost hedges, more hedges than we've planted since 2018. So we would be, on rather shaky ground, but hopefully by the time we do kick in, we will have reversed that and we will be in a more positive situation. There's plenty of hedges and habitats continuing to be removed and destroyed even as we speak. So I think in terms of the timelines, we're hoping that the fur farming bill will be enacted, once we've got through the Seanad as soon as possible. We haven't set a commencement date as such yet, but I think it will be as soon as possible. I think the fur farmers themselves understand that, and that this year's breeding season, as my understanding is, will not take place. I think they're aware of that. I think that would be fair to say. Yeah, thank you. Better correct to make sure I'm saying the right words. But and I think the engagement has been fairly extensive with my department, and I'm sure my department are open to further engagement with the fur farmers involved, to make this as fair as possible. And I think we have had an independent review overviewing the compensation mechanisms to date, and we'll just have to see how that pans out. But I think an independent assessor, we would hope, would be able to come to the most fairest and fairest package of all. I suppose Senator Kyne, in relation to BPS payments are available under forested land, and I think there are proposals in the next CAP strategic plan to not only in the eco schemes, which we have identified payments for non-productive areas, and I was certainly if we have tree planting under this legislation in a scheme that would help support that. There's also proposed to increase the eligible area to include up to 30% of sort of scrub or rushes, previous types of land that farmers would have been felt very much enforced to drain or to cut or to remove. So I think that is positive for biodiversity into the future. Indeed, Senator O'Loughlin, oak is indeed one of the species, on the list for native tree, and one of our best special native species. So I think that is to be welcomed. And just generally updates in forestry, and I know there's a lot of absolute concern out there. I mean, I can say that in the last year we have seen a rather significant turnaround in terms of felling licences issued. This time last year we were very much in a crisis in relation to felling licences, and supply into the sawmills was really really difficult situation. That I'm happy to say is not the case at the moment. We don't have an issue with supply into the sawmill sector, so that has been improved. We do have an issue with the issuing of afforestation licences, and I absolutely accept that, and the intention this year is to double the number of afforestation licences issued. So I think that's positive. I think if this legislation is passed on small-scale planting, that might help that target also. And also, I think what's important is to engage with farmers and landowners to make planting of trees something they actually want to do. And I think there is a fear at the moment. Perhaps maybe there's people are dissuaded maybe from planting trees, when we absolutely need to reverse that, and we need farmers and landowners to really engage, and the sector, the wider sector, to promote the positive benefits of forestry for everything, for all its functions, not only just for timber production and rural economies, but also for all the issues we understand in terms of carbon sequestration, storage, biodiversity, amenity values. I mean, most people live quite relatively close to a wooded area, and they certainly enjoy that. So, look, I suppose just to finish up, to thank all the senators again. If I haven't answered everyone's questions, please do chase me up afterwards. But look, again, just if we can, I suppose we can agree, which we seem to have, that the prohibition of fur farming and the provision of enabling legislation to facilitate native tree planting is a positive step forward. This bill will result in positive change to our society, and I certainly look forward to subsequent engagements with the senators on this bill. So I commend the bill to the Seanad. Thank you.
Minister, that was a nice wrap-up of everybody's comments. Thank you very much for your feedback. So the question is that the bill be now read a second time. Is that agreed? Agreed. When is it supposed to take committee stage?
Tuesday, next Tuesday.
Tuesday, is that agreed? Okay, so when is it supposed to sit again?
Tomorrow at 10:30.
Tomorrow at 10:30, is that agreed? Okay, so the House stands adjourned until 10:30 tomorrow morning. Garmino Hagwav.